All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack the absolutely fascinating history of the Kandyan Kingdom. We are looking at a truly vibrant, completely self-sufficient empire. I mean, we're talking incredible architecture, a booming economy, and this fierce independence. But what makes this story so captivating, and honestly, kind of mind-blowing, is how this seemingly impenetrable kingdom just collapsed, literally overnight.
It's a total historical mystery, right? Because for centuries, no European power, not the Portuguese, not the Dutch, nobody could conquer Kandy by force. The mountainous terrain and the sheer resistance of the locals basically turned it into a massive fortress. And yet, the British eventually just walked right in. They took the entire kingdom without shedding a single drop of blood on the battlefield. So how does that even happen?
Well, to understand that, let's jump right into Section 1, Kandy's bloodless fall. We need to look at exactly how its final days played out.
So, this rapid-fire sequence of events was actually triggered entirely from the inside. It all started with this bitter internal dispute between King Sri Vikrama Rajasinha and his own chief, Ehelepola. Feeling totally threatened, Ehelepola actually went and sought British protection. He even supported the English in their invasion against his very own king. The king had to flee his palace, hiding out in a house in Meta Mahanwara. But he was hunted down, caught by his own people, and handed right over to the English. This whole dramatic saga culminated in the signing of a massive treaty in 1815.
Now, this is the part that just stuns me. The sheer irony here is staggering. The Kandyan people were so deeply fed up with their own king that they offered absolutely zero resistance to the British forces. Think about that for a second. A historically unconquerable fortress city was breached simply because literally no one felt their leader was worth defending anymore. The English just strolled into the city without any difficulty whatsoever.
And the fallout? Swift and absolute. The king surrendered and was promptly exiled by the English all the way over to Vellore in India. Then, on March 2, 1815, Governor Brownrigg sat down with the Kandyan elite and signed the Udarata Givisuma, or the Kandyan Convention. With just that one document, all rights to the throne were completely renounced. And just like that, the sovereignty of a mighty kingdom vanished, and the entire country became a British colony.
Okay, so what exactly did the British just absorb? What was the actual value of this kingdom they snagged so easily? That brings us to Section 2, a self-sufficient economy.
So, the absolute backbone of Kandy was agriculture, but they did things a bit differently up there. If you look at older Lankan kingdoms, they leaned heavily on massive man-made tanks to store water, but Kandy, they were smack in the middle of the wet zone, getting ample rain all year round. Their unique, super hilly geography meant they didn't even need to build those massive tanks. Instead, they used this ingenious terrace cultivation, literally carving steps right into the hillsides and just letting that abundant rainwater do all the heavy lifting.
And because they were producing so much on their own, they were incredibly protective of their borders. To safeguard this self-sufficient economy, they set up strict border control checkpoints known as gravets. These were basically heavily monitored guard posts right at the boundaries, designed to strictly control and track every piece of merchandise moving between the upcountry and the lowcountry.
Just look at the sheer wealth flowing through these borders. We're talking absolute luxury exports: ivory, elephants, gems, pearls, and a massive treasure trove of spices like cardamom, cloves, and nutmeg. It's wild. In return, they imported really specific things they couldn't just make themselves, like horses, delicate ceramic ware, and perfumes. And they managed all this using a mix of actual money and a highly organized barter system.
You can actually see this economic engine in motion right here, with workers bundling up cinnamon quills to get them ready for trade. Cinnamon was, frankly, a real game changer. It was so massively lucrative that the king kept it locked down under a strict royal monopoly. Nobody else touched it. He alone controlled the trade deals with the Europeans out on the coast, as well as the major trade routes with India.
But listen, they weren't just farmers and spice traders. Oh no, they had a highly organized industrial sector. Pretty much everything the kingdom needed was made right there at home. And they organized this geographically. Entire villages were dedicated to very specific crafts based on caste, which meant techniques were perfected and handed down generation to generation. For example, Kotmale was absolutely legendary for its ironwork, while Dumbara was the go-to spot for beautiful reed products. They even used fine lacquer to beautifully finish off their goods.
Let's shift gears a bit and explore Section 3, Society and Unique Marriages. Because the way their families were structured actually played a huge role in protecting all that economic output.
So the average Kandyan village was incredibly self-contained and built entirely on mutual cooperation. Society itself was sliced into three main strata. Right at the top, working with the king, you had the clergy and the elite, the aristocrats running the day-to-day administration. And then you had the common masses, which made up the farmers, the laborers, the traders, and all those highly skilled craftsmen we just talked about.
At the very heart of this system was the family unit. It was a deeply patriarchal setup where property usually trickled down from father to children. And because holding on to that property was so crucial, they had very strict, formalized rules for getting married, mainly broken into two types. In a Diga marriage, the bride packs up and moves into the groom's home. But in a Bina marriage, it's the groom who moves into the bride's family home.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Alongside those traditional setups, they also practiced a specific form of polyandry. We're talking about a setup where several brothers from the exact same family would actually bring in and share a single bride. Now, to our modern ears, that definitely begs the question, why on earth would a highly structured society organize their families like that?
Honestly, it all comes back to economics and basic survival. Think about it. In a society where your entire wealth and livelihood depend on farming, your land is literally everything. By having brothers share a wife, the family guaranteed that their precious agricultural plots stayed totally intact. It completely prevented the farm from being chopped up into tiny, useless little pieces among a bunch of competing heirs. It was just a purely pragmatic, brilliant economic strategy.
And speaking of pragmatic brilliance, let's look at Section 4, termite-proof architecture, because they brought that exact same problem-solving energy to their buildings. Check out this incredibly clever workaround. This is a Tempita Vihara, which is essentially a temple built entirely on stilts. Back then, builders had a massive headache. Termites and insects would just devour their beautiful wooden structures from the ground up. So what did they do? They planted these heavy stone pillars deep into the earth and then built the wooden temple right on top of the stones. Boom! Termite problem solved. And when you look at the masterfully carved wooden pillars of places like the Mbeketa Temple, you completely understand why they went through so much effort to protect that wood. And since we're talking about masterpieces, let's transition right into Section 5, the art of storytelling. Because in Kandy, art wasn't just there to look pretty, it was an incredibly functional tool for mass education. Look at the sheer vibrancy of these plant and mineral colors. Notice that really intense, heavy use of red? That is a total hallmark of the Kandyan era. These wall paintings were primarily used to narrate Buddhist Jataka stories, tales like the Vasantara or Dhammzonda Jataka. It was their way of bringing the core principles of Buddhism straight to the everyday people. What I absolutely love about this is that these walls were basically the explainer graphics of their day. The #1 design rule was accessibility. They had to be understood by everyone no matter their education level. So they broke the walls down into columns to tell a continuous step-by-step story. They even added helpful little captions under the pictures. And get this, they didn't care at all about making the humans or animals look perfectly proportional. Making the story clear was way more important than making it look realistic. And any awkward blank space left over, they just filled it with gorgeous floral designs to keep your eyes glued to the wall.
Which finally brings us to the end of our explainer and leaves us with a pretty profound thought to chew on. We've just explored an empire with brilliant termite-proof architecture, a booming agricultural and export economy, strict border security, and this incredibly effective system for mass communication. And yet, all of that infrastructure couldn't save them the moment the people lost faith in their leader and just handed the keys over to an invading army. So it makes you wonder, if physical walls and economic wealth aren't enough to save a kingdom, what truly makes a society unbreakable? Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating slice of history with me.